Back again, and welcome back. And we're going to be pushing on from where we left off in our last video, where we, as you can see, what I've got on my screen. This is pretty much where we've last left off. So what I'm going to do now, actually, I'm going to create a portal, like a way of actually logging in and out of the system. So we're going to implement a login form, and we're going to create our security controller, which is going to allow us to process that login and to jump to that login page. So if I quickly take you back to my routes, you can see I've already got a login route set up, and we've got a controller called security and a action or a method called index. So I'm going to actually put a couple of links within my own controller index template, so we've got somewhere we can point to. So we've got somewhere we can, or got a link that we can click that's going to take us to our login page. So I'm going to quickly create a anchor tag within my index.html file or HTML template and point it to my login controller. So if I go back to not that directory, in our app directory, and if I fetch that index file, I'm just going to get rid of this, and I'm going to put an anchor tag in and point it to my login controller. I'm going to call it sign in, and I'm going to say /login, right? Because that is the key for a route, login, and it's going to hit our security controller and then hit that index method. So if I reload the page, you see we've got that sign in link. If I click it, it obviously doesn't throw an error because it says that we haven't got a security controller, which we haven't. So we're going to go ahead and create that within our controllers directory. So I'm going to create a new file, called it security controller.php, and I'm going to PHP declare strict types namespace. Again, we're in that app folder within our controllers directory. It's going to be class security controller just like so. And as I said, when we created our own controller, every controller that is going to be extending that base controller must declare that constructor method. So I'm going to extend base controller like that. It imports it in for us. Then I'm going to say public function construct, and we want that array of route params just like so. And then because we've extended into that base controller again, we want to pass that argument to our parent construct or our parent constructor. So it's : construct, and we're going to pass that route params argument in, just like so. So that's our security controller. Now we need to implement that index method. So say public or protected. Public will work, just so I'm making all my routes protected. So protected function to be index action, and I'm just going to call that render function, which is going to render that template for us, and it's going to be within the client directory. I'm going to create a new folder called security to reflect our security controller, and within that I'm going to have my index.html.twig file. So let's go ahead and create that. So within my client directory, I'm going to create a security folder. Security, just like so. Then I'm going to create a index.html.twig file, just like so. going to implement or extend that base file by typing still in where that is. So extend in quotes, I'm going to say base.html.twig, right? And if I reload again, so we get another error about that content block. So let's just put that in. Say block content title and block content title, and we can say login. Just give it a name, login. Reload. We got our login up top, and we're now loading our template, right? So in order to sort of like display our HTML form, we need to declare the main block, which is where our content is going to go. So it's going to be block, and it's called main. We're going to end that block. Just like so. So we need to start building our login form, and for that we're going to be creating a new directory within our app directory, and we're going to be putting our form in the relevant folder that's going to reflect the controller that it's representing. So if I close this up for a minute, close this up, I'm going to create a new folder within my app directory called our forms. Within forms, I also want to create a clients directory and a admin directory. And the clients directory is going to contain all the forms that's going to be on the front end, and the admin is going to contain all the forms that's going to be in the back end, just to create a deep level of organization. So we're going to be client, and we're in our security controller, so we're going to create a security directory within our client directory. So to be security, and that's where we're going to be creating our login form. So I'll create a new file called login form.php, just like so. Now I'm going to actually bring in some or implement some classes, and we're going to construct this login form. I'm going to explain as I go along. So it's PHP declare strict type equal 1 namespace. Right, so we need to name this carefully as we've laid out the directory. So we're first within that app directory. Now we go into forms directory, into client directory, spell that properly, and now we're into our security directory. That's going to be our namespace, just like so. So we'll say class login form, and we want to extend our client form builder and implement the client form builder interface. So I want to say extend client form builder right here, and we want to implement the client form builder interface, which is form builder interface, just like that. And you can see that it's brought in those two namespace for us, which is located within our Magma core directory in our form builder component. Now if I put my mouse pointer right here, it's saying that we've not implemented the single method that we have to implement, which is the create form method, right? And that takes in two arguments, one which is the action route, and the second which is a optional argument which contains any sort of like data that we want to pass back into or create form method, right? So I'm going to declare this public method called create form, just like so. And I'm going to declare both method the string, which is action, and the second as an object. And it's an optional argument, so it's going to be question sign object repository, and that's going to equal null, signifying that we don't really need to use it. It's an optional argument, right? Now, what do we need for a login form? We need a input for our email. We need two inputs, one for email, one for a password, and we need a submit button. Also, we can also implement a checkbox that we can tick to say remember me, and that's going to actually within itself do some other bits and bobs, which I'm going to demonstrate. So I'm going to bring in the method that we're going to need or use to build our form. So the first thing that we need to do is to return, right? And what are we returning? We are returning this form, just like so. And on that form, we can call a couple of methods. Well, the main method that we're going to be calling is the add method. And within the add method, that takes in 3 arguments, with the first one being an array. And they could all be an array, in all honesty. They're all optional apart from the first one, which is an array which takes in the fully qualified namespace of the input type, and that itself is an array which we can then use to declare the input attributes. So let me do that and demonstrate so you can see what I'm saying. So the first field I want to bring in is, I'm going to say add. Let's put this on a separate line so it's a bit more readable. So add, and this allows us to add our first input field or input type. And how we do that is we declare an array like so, and we want to get an input field for our email. And I've got within this form builder component, I've got different input types. So we can say something like email type : class, just like so. And that is going to equal an array which we can then use to define the email input type attribute. So we need to bring this class in. So it's going to be use Magma Core to be your form builder, to be in type, and we need that email type, just like that. And while we're at it, let's just copy this and bring in the other types that we're going to need, just to save some time. So we're going to need our password type. We're going to need our checkbox type. And the last one is our submit type. Like so. So now that we've brought those input types in that we're going to be using for this login form, let me quickly just reiterate over again what I'm doing. So we've got the add method, and we can call this method as much as we want to input as much input types as we want, depending on what we're building. So the first argument is an array where we're declaring an associative array where the key is the actual input type or the fully qualified namespace of that input type, and that's going to equal another array where we're going to be defining the attributes for this email input type. And we're going to be using most of the attribute the default attribute set within the framework, but the one that we really must change is the name attribute. So I'm going to say name email. And it's also important to note that it's always good to name your attribute the same as what we've done with our database table. Now in my database table, I've got a attribute, or I've got a field called email, and that's effectively what I'm reflecting right here. Now you can do it however you want, but it just means additional work to then cast that back to your database field name when you come to process these forms. How I built this framework, it does it for you if you go with the convention of what I'm doing now. Now the next input type I want to add is the password type. So I'm going to say add array. I'm going to say password type, like so. Declare an array to say name password hash, because this is the name of the field in my users database table. It's called password hash, and it's what contains the hash version, or the decrypted version of the user inputted password when that user registered their account, just like so. And the last method, well, not the last method, I've got our next add. I'm going to put in checkbox. So checkbox type, class, declare, and I'm going to give this a name of remember me, like so, just like that. Now with this checkbox type, I would set up is that we're going to be using some of the other arguments for this particular add method. So we're going to do stuff like disable the default label, and we're going to recreate our own. And the way we're going to be doing that is we're going to declare the second argument as null, and the third argument is an array. And the first thing we're going to be doing is we're going to disable the default label. So I'm going to say show label, and that's going to be false, and we want to add a checkbox label. So I'm going to say checkbox label, and I'm going to call it remember me, just like so. Yeah. And the third and last add we're going to do is our submit button. Again, an array, and we have the submit type, and it's going to equal to another array. And what we're going to be doing in here is that we're going to pass in a name attribute, which I'm going to demonstrate what we're going to be doing with this name attribute. So for this, I'm going to say name. I'm going to say sign in, just like so. And the last thing we're going to do is we're going to add a build method, and this method is what then builds our form the way we want. So we're going to say build colon, and this is the last method that we have to call after we add. We have to call this build method, right? And this build method itself accepts one argument, which is also an array, and we could add stuff like before and after container, which is going to wrap around each input type. So let's put one more bracket here, or else I'm going to get an error, I think. Yep. Oh, sorry, it got a colon there. Take that off. And let's declare that as an array. I'm going to say before, and I'm going to add a div tag. I'm going to say div, give it a class of UK margin, and I'm going to add a after with the closing div tag. And what's going to happen is each of these input type is going to have this div element wrapped around it, right? So let's save that, and let's bring this back to our security controller. Now, in the last video, I mentioned that within our constructor method, we're going to be using a special method called container, and that's effectively acting as our dependency container, which is going to inject these dependencies that we need within this particular security controller class. So I'm going to do that so you can see exactly how it works. So I'm going to say this container, and it takes in an array of arguments. So I'm going to declare square brackets, and how we define these is also an associative array where the key becomes the property of the actual object. So I'm going to demonstrate. I'm going to bring that login form that we've just created, and I'm going to bring it into our security controller. So I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call it login form. And I'm going to point that to login form namespace. So I'm going to say backtick app, say forms, client, security, login form, : class, just like so. So now we've passed this class within this container method. We've given it a key called login form, right? So what we're going to do now is we're going to fetch this method, this create method, into our index action. Let's do that. I'm going to pass it in as a second argument for this render method. So to make a new line, I like putting these on separate lines. So let's do that. Comma, just like so. Indent that in. I'm going to call this form, just like so, and I'm going to say this login form create form, or what's it called? It's called create form. Yeah, just like so. So this is what I'm saying. The login form becomes, when it's passed through this container method, the login form key becomes the property. So we can use it like this login form, which is going to allow us to fetch that method within this particular object, right? And I said the first argument is the action where we're going to be processing that form in, and the second argument is optional. We won't be using that second argument within this particular method, but we will be using it in other method, right? So I'm going to pass the action in as security login, right? And what this is, security reflects the controller that we're in, and login will be the method which we have not yet created. So we can create that to be a protected function, and it's going to call login action. Remember, it has to be suffixed with the action string to make it a route, just like so. But we can actually pass this variable into our template, and we can actually look at the form, right? So if I go back to my index twig file, not the index, and we go to we go to the security index, in fact, and we can pass in that variable. And we need square bracket, and we've called it form, just like that. So we're going to reload our login route and see what we're getting back. So there we go. We're getting the form, but with Twig we need to add, or we need to pipe on the raw method to it. So say pipe raw, just like that, and reload, and there you go. We've got a login form, we've got the labels, email, password hash, and signing in. But obviously this doesn't look very good. We can actually improve this somewhat. So I'm going to go back to the login form, and we're going to use the third argument on the submit type to hide this label, because we don't want that label, right? So if I hit the submit type, I'm going to null the second argument, and the third argument I'm going to say show label, set that to false. Yeah, reload. No, that label is gone, right? Now we've also got password hash. Now we don't really want it to be called password hash, we just want it to be called password. So again, we can modify that as well. And again, I'm going to touch on to the password type. I'm going to null the second argument, and the third argument, which is also going to be an array, I'm going to say new label, just password, just like that. Reload. There we go. It's just saying password, right? Now our submit button needs some styling, so we're going to add some classes onto it and make it a smaller button, as it's spanning the entire width of that container. So we're going to adjust that as well. So I'm going to say within this submit type array, I'm going to say class, which is a next attribute, and it's going to be another array, because we can declare arrays of classes. And the first one I'm going to say UK button, and UK button primary. Let's see what we get back. Reload. There we go. So it's a much smaller button, and we've added that primary class onto it, which turns it into blue. Now we can also change the label that says submit. We can make it say whatever we want, and again, that's going to be affected by another attribute called the value. So I'm to say value, I'm to call it login, just like so. Reload, and now it's just a login button, right?